Since ancient times, dogs have lived alongside people as their friends and helpers. They were the first animals that people have domesticated. People shared food with their dogs, while the dogs helped them hunt and guard their homes. Thus started the faithful friendship between dogs and people. Today, the role of dogs in people's lives is very important. First of all, dogs are often the family pets that raise spirits, entertain, and play with the children. Specially trained dogs help find people in the mountains, perform water rescues, serve in the police, and some even become guide dogs for people who can't see. Dogs also won't let people get lost in the forest. They are faithful friends who will never laugh at nor betray their person, and will understand their owner's mood and always strive to improve it, despite not being able to speak. There are many stories out there about the loyalty and kindness of dogs. We often hear these stories from other people, read about them in books, or see them on TV. But when we get to experience something like it firsthand, it makes us want to share it with the world. Emily was the child that my wife and I had waited for very long, so you can imagine our sheer joy when she was born. The blue-eyed, blonde, curly-haired girl gave our lives a whole new meaning and filled our quiet home with cheerful laughter. I always tried to be the best role model for my daughter in everything. We played, cooked, studied, and even went fishing together. Many fathers, especially those who have daughters, will agree with me that it's important to earn your child's trust and become their best friend from an early age. For as long as I can remember, Emily had always wanted a dog. Each of her birthday parties ended with the same frustration in her eyes, as her biggest wish was for a four-legged furry friend in the house. Many times we had sat down as a family and talked the idea over with her. I knew what responsibility having a dog would entail, and to be honest, I never particularly wanted to get one. What with the endless trips to the vet, fur that gets everywhere, the drooling, the constant barking, the dirty paws, at least those were the things that I associated with dogs. But fate had other plans for us. At one point in my career, I was promoted and relocated to another state. That meant that our family had to move, and Emily had to enroll in a new school. Events like these are always stressful, especially for the kids, and Emily was no exception. Everything she knew and enjoyed so much in life suddenly disappeared because of the move to a new city. My wife and I were very worried about how Emily would feel, because our move also happened to coincide with Emily starting her teenage years. She had to handle the new teachers, new classmates, and it was obvious that she was having a hard time with all these changes. I tried to talk to her as often as possible, offer her support, and spend time together, but I felt that Em was just closing off to the world more and more. As the months went by, I got absorbed in my work. Sometimes I'd come home only in time to go to bed, so I couldn't spend that much time with my daughter. I'd always carry the guilt of us being more and more distant around with me in the back of my mind. "Good morning, how are you? What's new at school?" "Hey Dad, I'm okay. I gotta run," was the extent of our daily conversations. One day while resting after a difficult night shift, I woke up to the noise and laughter coming from the yard. I quickly rubbed my eyes, stepped outside to see what was going on, and just froze at my doorstep. There I saw Emily. She was happily playing with a dog I didn't know. A dog whose breed was clearly intended for violence. "Em, what in the world are you doing? Get away from that dog! It might bite you! Some neighbors must have lost their dog, and I guess you lost all fear," I shouted, barely able to contain myself. Emily wasn't afraid, though. She ran up to me, happily chanting, "Daddy, meet Ray. I want him to live with us," said my daughter, pointing at the terrifying dog who had its mouth open and was wagging its tail. "Have you lost your mind? That dog probably has an owner. Look, he's got a collar on. And you know that I'm against having animals in the house," I continued. "Ray doesn't have an owner, and even if he does, he is not going back to him. You don't know anything about it, Dad, because I didn't tell you, but Ray protected me when I needed it the most. So I need to take care of my friend," Emily shouted, tears welling up in her eyes. All the while, she stroked the dog that had already nestled down at her feet. This was when it hit me. I needed to listen to Emily right now, because clearly something important was happening in her life. If I put my ambition ahead of her, I could really ruin our relationship. After all, truth be told, I hadn't seen her this happy in a long time. We sat down on the stairs in front of the house, and Emily began her story. "You know, Dad, my first days at the new school were very hard. The other kids didn't want to accept me into their social circle. and I often felt lonely. Once, when I was on my way home, 2 senior boys surrounded me. They started teasing me, mocking and insulting me. They wouldn't let me pass. One of them even tried to get my pocket money from me. You know, the money that you give me every once in a while? I was terrified. And as soon as I covered my face with my hands, I heard those senior boys running off, shouting, "She's got a fighting dog! Let's get out of here!" When I opened my eyes, I saw Ray bolting towards me. I was pretty scared at first because I had never seen a dog like Ray without its muzzle or an owner. I always thought that they were very violent, but Ray didn't even bark. I noticed that he was hungry, dirty, and had scars all over his face. I guessed that his previous owner had thrown him out on the street, and the dog hadn't had a good meal in a long time. I took out my lunchbox and I offered the poor thing my sandwich. He came closer and shyly took the food from my hand before running into the bushes. The next day, I took a couple of sausages from home, hoping to see Ray again. I found him waiting for me in the same place, greeting me with his wagging tail. We met up every day until now. We became friends and bonded, and I don't get bullied at school anymore. My classmates noticed how Ray would meet me after school and even started offering their food to help out. That's when I started making friends. Dad, I really love Ray. Look how sweet he is. He may have suffered a lot of pain in his life, but I want him to live in a loving home now, where he can feel happy. I'm sorry, darling, that I hadn't listened to you in so long, I whispered to Emily as I hugged her. Your friend is my friend, and I'll do anything to make you happy. A couple of months passed since we took in our newest family member. I built an enclosure in the backyard for Ray, got him checked out at the vet, bought all sorts of dog toys, and enjoyed watching my daughter and wife play with him every day. I often took him with me on runs in the park or fishing trips. I loved Ray with all my heart, and it never crossed my mind that his old owner might show up. This weekend, my family and I went camping out of town. We enjoyed the nice weather, roasted some meat, and played frisbee. Ray was darting around in the sand like crazy when suddenly his ears perked up and he began to growl. An unfamiliar man was approaching us, cheekily smoking a cigar. I had to grab a hold of Ray's collar as he was lashing out and barking at the stranger. "Howdy, folks. You know it's not nice to steal someone else's property, right?" said the stranger, before turning to the dog. "Hey there, boy. You've had your fun. You've understood how bad you are. Now it's time to go home." The man reached for the dog, but before he could even touch it, Ray jumped at him with all his might and threw him to the ground. I knew exactly what was going on, and I fought to pull Ray off the cocky stranger. He was pale from fear, but he kept on shouting, "Give me my dog back. He owes me. I was making good money on him, and he needs to go back to work. I threw him away when he wasn't performing well, but now I want him back. Ray is my property." And then I couldn't help myself. How dare you even go near Ray? You've been treating him like trash all his life, using him for shows and money? He's not your toy, and he deserves nothing less than a loving family. If you ever take one step near him again, we'll call the police. The stranger understood the implications of being turned into the police, so he had no choice but to turn around and leave. Ray was becoming increasingly difficult to hold back from seriously hurting his former owner. When we got home and recovered a little from the shock, Emily gave me a big hug and said, "You're the best, Daddy. I'm so grateful that you accepted Ray into our home and protected him. You have done so much for me." I never felt as good as when Emily said those words to me. I finally found understanding with my daughter and a friend for our whole family. This year's birthday was Emily's best by far.